I'm Chris Lee, joined by Blake Lovell. We are here to talk about the first night of SEC conference basketball. And Blake, let me just start with this. Thank God it wasn't football, given the way the SEC is playing. But we did have some interesting stuff happen. Let's start in Auburn, where LSU is no longer unbeaten. And frankly, Auburn came out of the gate, I think, on an 18-1 run over the first 10 minutes of the game, which neither of us expected, but really won that game in surprisingly decisive fashion, Blake. I know that LSU made it interesting at times, but Auburn was in control from pretty much start to finish in that one.
Yeah, that's what's interesting is I didn't think LSU played that bad as a whole. I thought they got off to a bad start, but overall, I don't think they played bad. I think that it was more about Auburn. I really do. Like I think it's just more about them being really good, and I think that's kind of what you take away from that game. Is we talked about it. You put them they were 1-2 in the SEC in whatever order you want to put them in, but now I think Auburn certainly moves up to that top spot at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought LSU defensively wasn't bad. It's still like they did a lot of things that I think that have helped them be successful. But it's just I told you, and we talked about it. I texted you throughout the game. Like I don't see anyone beating Auburn
Uh-uh.
at Auburn Arena this year. Like it's one of those things where sure injuries, everything going on, maybe guys aren't playing, but at full strength, I don't think anyone beats them there. And I just think that that's the nature of how good they are and the nature of the atmosphere. I don't see it. I think that they are going to beat everyone they play there. And obviously I'm saying that now in late December when a lot of things can change, but that is just, we've said it. It's just a really hard place to win. And, aside from that first stretch, I didn't think LSU played horrible. I'm sure Will Wade and his staff may disagree on a lot of things, but I didn't. I watched throughout the game and I'm thinking, I don't think they're a bad team. They didn't make some shots. I mean, you've got to make shots to beat Auburn. They didn't shoot the ball well enough, and that's kind of what it comes down to. But I think you give Auburn some credit for that too. So, yeah. I mean, what do you say about Kessler, right?
I was going to bring him up next, okay? He was my wild card player in this league for any team. And we had questions. We had reasons it would work and reasons it wouldn't. Like, he's getting better every game. He had a triple-double last night. Points,
11
rebounds,
blocks.
and blocks, which is not a way that you usually see it done. I know Luke Cornett did it for Vandy a few years ago, but I think he went, 16, 11, and 11?
I know he had 16 and 11. I don't remember what the rebounding number was, but like the 11 blocks. I mean, he had 3 blocks in the first, 5 minutes of the game, something like that. And yeah, he's the difference maker. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to. As you can see, he just impacts the game in so many different ways. And I mean, that's what you said. I mean, we talked about it one season. He was the wild card. If he played the way we thought he could, Auburn could win the SEC. And right now they look like the front runner to do just that. And again, I'm not quick to jump off the LSU bandwagon yet. I think that was one of those games that I talked about. I thought it was going to be tough for them to win that game no matter what. And I still think they did a lot of things well. They didn't make enough shots. They turned it over a few too many times, but I still think their defense is going to put them in a position to not really go anywhere. And we also said it too, though, their schedule does not do them any favors this first month of conference play. I mean, they are not going to have any nights off. Every game is going to be a challenge. So how they bounce back against Kentucky next week, I think will be interesting.
Well, LSU, I think, and I'll have to look this up. I'm pulling it up as we're doing this. I think LSU is still the highest ranked net team in the league. I think they're 8th this morning. So, I mean,
Maybe,
the
yeah.
first game they've lost, I know they haven't had a lot of great wins, but they've had a lot of quality wins. And I'm with you. I think what I keep coming back to, and we'll get to this on Alabama, Tennessee in a minute, it's just awfully hard to win on certain home courts in the league. And I think Auburn right now, like you said, I don't know that there's many teams in the league, if not the country, that are going to enjoy a bigger advantage than Auburn will in that place.
Yeah, it'll be the hardest place in the league, I think, to win at this season. Yeah, I think that's the way it has been for the most part. I think since Bruce Pearl's been there, especially with his good teams, it's just they have just had a home court advantage that a lot of other people have not been able to match. And yeah, I'm sure it'll be hard to win at Rupp, it'll be hard to win at Alabama, and so forth. But I just think yeah, something about playing at Auburn. I mean, you saw it last night. I mean, it's just their like it's just the style. It's everything. Like it's the culture, it's the style. They just can overwhelm you. Like the
Yeah.
fans can overwhelm you, just that building. Like, but they're also how they play. Like it just everything can sort of combine to just present a very challenging, scenario for opponents. And so, yeah, I mean, it was on full display last night, and yeah, I don't really have any doubts about who the number one team will be in our power rankings next week. So.
You and I have talked a lot about their front court of Kessler and Jabari Smith, but the thing we haven't talked about enough is their backcourt. Now, we've talked about it in the sense that when's Allen Flanagan coming back? What's he going to be? Last night, I think one of the biggest numbers for Auburn was him playing 29 minutes. To me, that's a big thing. If he's ready to play that kind of workload, they are really going to be tough. But Wendell Green Jr. is a guy we haven't talked about a lot. He was a transfer from Eastern Kentucky, I think a freshman All-American a year ago. He has really plugged right in and run that point position to just a level that I think was above and beyond what we expected. I mean, when you go from the OVC to the SEC, you just don't know. But Wendell Green Jr. last night, what was it? 15 points, 6 boards, 3 assists. Did have 5 turnovers, but I think he's about 2.5 on assists to turnovers for the year, which you'll take any day out of your point guard. To me, this is just a complete team, Blake. It's a team that you got 2 really good guards, you got 2 guys in the front court, you got some depth. Again, we think Auburn's the best team in the league right now, but you start looking for holes and vulnerabilities. Oh, by the way, we didn't get into KD Johnson either. He's a very good player for them. But I just think Auburn checks a lot of boxes right now.
Yeah, I think they don't have any glaring weaknesses. I think that's the biggest thing is when you're trying to find these teams that can go far and tournaments and, win a regular season title, it's usually the teams that, yes, they need to be great at certain things, but I also think it's also very important just to not have any of those just glaring things that cost you games. And I don't see anything right now. I don't see anything that's just glaring that makes me think, well, if they get in that situation against that team, they may be in trouble. But I think you can say that about some of these other teams in the SEC that are very good and could still, be a Final Four type team. But I think Auburn's just above everyone else right now. After that game specifically, as you can just see it, there's not really anything you're pointing at and saying, boy, they are gonna get, that's gonna come back to haunt them. I don't see anything with them right now that you kind of say that about, and I think there's certainly something to that. So.
Yeah, I feel like the computers haven't really sorted out the SEC yet, but I think the eyes are a better tool right now because look right now and, Auburn, LSU, Kentucky, Tennessee, all about the same spot by the computers, anywhere from that 9 to 12 range in most of them. Alabama, a half step behind. Then you get into State, Florida, and then Arkansas, and then you go down from there. But to me, I think that's going to start to play out pretty soon. But LSU, you said you didn't really dock the Tigers based on what you saw. Look, the offense really took a long time to get off the ground, but LSU did get it within, I think, 4 or 5 late. But any takeaways on the LSU side last night?
Not really. I just think they got off to a bad start. You can't put yourself in an 18-1 hole, and especially not there at Auburn. I think after that, they just didn't play bad. I thought that they did a lot of things well. They just didn't make shots, and like I said, maybe a few too many turnovers. But otherwise, did they defend as well as they have every other game? Maybe not, but you're playing a different team, and so I'm not there yet with like LSU in terms of just jumping off. I think that's one game, and that was a game that I didn't think they would win anyways. And when you get off to that kind of start, I think you're playing from behind the entire game, and it changes everything. So don't really have a lot. I'd say that I would, my opinion on LSU hasn't changed from before that game happened and after that game happened. I think it's just sort of the same sort of team and just a tough matchup on the road. So
let's move on up the state in Alabama last night. Alabama doesn't even hold on. They had to come from behind to win at the last minute. Tennessee, of course, without maybe its best player in Kennedy Chandler and John Fulkerson, who was coming off a huge game against Arizona. Both those guys had positive COVID tests. Oddly enough, I think Fulkerson was on the ground there last night and tweeting stuff out. But the protocols got them both. Tennessee led that game most of the way. And then I think Keon Ellis hit a big shot or two. Alabama came back late and won that game. I think under the circumstances, I was actually more impressed with what Tennessee did than what Alabama did. J.D. Davison was awful most of the night. Jaden Shackelford, who we love, really wasn't a factor most of the night. But give credit to Alabama. I think it says something that the Crimson Tide hung on and won a game. And Alabama really one of these teams, Blake, that just plays to the level of who they're playing. I mean, they beat Houston and Gonzaga, lose to Iona, have a couple other losses in there. Davidson's one of them. But it wasn't really surprising. I know people were saying, oh, hand that one to Alabama now with Chandler and Fulkerson out. But I'm thinking in the back of my head, nah, Alabama tends to play up to whatever's across the floor from them. And whether that's coincidence or not, it played out that way last night.
I mean, how many times over the years have we seen games impacted by a star player not playing, multiple guys not playing, and your mind immediately goes to, oh, well, they don't have a chance, right? There are countless times where that happens. And that's where, like, especially if you're a bettor, like, you are all in on that. Like, it's like, oh, well, everyone's all jumping on Alabama at that point. You're going Tennessee, and you got rewarded for that probably last night. I don't know what the line wound up being, but like that's what I think you always look at in these scenarios. And I don't think if you're an Alabama fan, it's like, oh, we only beat a Tennessee team, without Chandler and Fulkerson by 5. So what? Like, it's a win. It's your first SEC game. You win the game. And I think there's a lot more to that than just how the thing's set up. And like you said, I think if you're both teams, you can take away some positive things. Obviously, Alabama just winning. Noah Gurley played really well. I think that's a big positive to get a double-double from him. I mean, that's just, you'll take that any night you can. Talked about Shackelford. I mean, he just didn't make shots. I didn't think he played bad. He just didn't make shots. And you're going to have some of those games where you just don't make shots. And I think Tennessee, remember, too, that's the second best defensive team in the country, according to KenPom, behind LSU. So Tennessee's going to present some challenges that other teams just are not going to. And so I think that was one of those games where, you saw Keon Ellis. We talked about him. I mean, he does everything. Like, he just really does. Like, he just does everything. And I think that's where having a guy like that to go along with, the trio of guards everyone's talking about with Shackelford, Quinterly, and Davison, that's just so important. So I thought it was a game that probably, I mean, it didn't play out as you would have expected. There, you maybe would have thought Alabama would have got off to a better start, and Tennessee maybe struggled a little bit early. But, still, I think just with the two teams and how they play, there were a lot of things that, you sort of expected and how it played out. And obviously, we look back at a game like this and we're going to think, well, what would it have looked like with Chandler, going up against this Alabama guard group and all that. But at the same time, a lot of those other guys stepped up, and yeah, it was, it's a big win for Alabama, no matter what, because they're a team, as we've said, that has not been playing well as of late. So it's a big win no matter who's on the floor for Tennessee.
Yeah, and I want to get to the Tennessee angle in a minute, but the Gurley one, I'm glad you brought that up because he was their star last night. That was his first double-figure scoring game, I think, in an Alabama uniform. He averaged 14 a game and then 15 a game at Furman the last couple of years. But he was a transfer that I know that you were very familiar with and had circled as an impact player. To me, the thing I want to watch for Alabama going forward is what does their rotation and their minutes distribution look like? Because he's going to have to play a big role for them, or really you would think he would play a big role for them after the way he looked last night. Look, Shackelford and Quinterly are going to be there every night. J.D. Davison is the one that I don't know what you do with that kid because he's very talented, but he just makes so many dumb passes. The commentators were constantly harping on that last night for good reason. I'm really curious to see the trajectory of both those players and where it goes for them in terms of their minutes at Alabama following last night, Blake.
Obviously, it's Gurley's best game of the season in pretty much every statistical category. So that's promising because it's an SEC game against a good team. So I think that's certainly promising. I think on the Davidson front, it's like I always go back to this, and it's not an excuse, but I don't care how good you are as a freshman. You're going to have some of, quote unquote, those games. Like, you're going to have games that are just bad, and they are not, you are going to look like you're a high school player playing in a college game. Like, that's some of those games are just going to look like that. And that just happened to be one of those games. And like I said, too, I think we have to give Tennessee credit for some of that because, this is a team that's going to challenge you defensively. And so I I think with him, it is going to be a matter of, and we said that coming into the season. I don't think the expectation for him was ever that you were just thinking he was going to be, you know, yes, 5-star player, but I don't know that the expectation was like he's just going to be the runaway top player on this team, or the top freshman in the league. I think you could see some things that he's going to excel at, and there's things as a lot of freshmen that he'll need to get better at. And I think that was just one of those games, and he hasn't played well over the past whatever couple weeks now, and maybe that's a key factor. And Alabama struggles a little bit, so I think that he'll be fine eventually, but. It is the SEC, and it's not the SEC of whatever year. Pick your year, years ago when the league was not very good. Like, it's a much different challenge, and I think he may struggle a little bit over these first couple weeks or so. But once he gets acclimated, the potential's there. He's got all the potential in the world, and yeah, I think you just chalk it up to he's got to get better at some things, and he'll be able to do that a lot easier against teams that don't play defense sometimes the way that Tennessee does. So.
Well, the interesting thing with Tennessee last night was it was those other guys that had to step up. Zakai Ziegler was the point guard on the floor that looked like the 5-star freshman between the two last night. He was great. Olivier, I'm going to get it wrong. I think it's Kumwa. Started, got them 15 points, hit a big shot late on an open three-pointer, really played well for them. Josiah Jordan-James gave them a lot of minutes. Tennessee really hung in there. I think the one thing, if I'd been Rick Barnes, I think Justin Powell would have seen the floor for me a little bit more. They needed a guy who could hit a big shot at one point. They just weren't getting it. But I don't know. I thought the Vols played really well under the circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's hard to take anything away from a game like that other than just you did have guys step up. But you do know that everything just changes in terms of you don't have the guy who has the ball in his hands more than anyone on the floor. And so it just changes a lot of things. So I think you say, all right, yes, we had some guys step up. Now they're in a position, to use that going forward when Chandler is on the floor. But I think without him on the floor, it's just a completely different sort of setup for Tennessee. And that's kind of, I think, what you take away from that game is, yeah, they did a lot of things well. There were some missed opportunities, but it's a different look when he's not on the floor because he kind of is the guy that everything runs through. So, yeah, I think you certainly applaud the other guy stepping up, but how different would it have been had he been on the floor, and just how different would the approach be? Not just the game, but I think just the approach, just in how they play whenever he's there. So.
Okay, let's shift gears to Arkansas, Mississippi State. I didn't see a minute of that. I don't know that you did either. The box score, I'll pull it up. That game got, I think it was a double-digit win for State easily. J.D. Notae didn't play. He's probably Arkansas's best player right now. But your gut feeling on Arkansas all along, and we've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast, is that they're just not there yet. And certainly they did not respond very well without Notae. And I think they had a couple other guys out too. One suspension, I think one, I can't remember if it was a COVID test or what it was, but not the way you wanted to start your conference play if you're Arkansas.
Yeah, I saw this one. I thought it was, again, we just talked about Tennessee. Take away Kennedy Chandler, Arkansas, you take away J.D. Notae. It's just a different game. I think I don't want to say it's a throwaway game because it's not, but it's just different. And, again, that game plays out a lot differently, I think, if he's on the floor. But at the same time, I think, the focus certainly, and we talked about Arkansas' schedule. It's a very manageable schedule, at least on paper. I don't know that I would have picked them to win this game. I don't remember if I did or not, but I think you probably would have picked them to lose a game like this just based on how they've been playing. But, they're going to be in pretty good shape over the next several weeks in terms of win opportunities. But I say that, and we talk a whole lot about Arkansas, and I think everyone will probably still take that away from here. But I think the discussion should more be about Mississippi State in terms of, I think they're way better than people are giving them credit for. I know they've lost some games, but, Louisville's not bad. Minnesota's not bad. Colorado State's pretty good.
Yeah. And they haven't gotten blown out of any of those, have they? Colorado
really.
State was a one-possession game?
They lost to Louisville by 14, but I mean, that's November, right? Like, yeah, there's some games that are weird in November. I mean, they haven't played an overly tough schedule, but I think that's one that you kind of look at and say, if you just watch them play, if you take the data out of it and all this other stuff, like they're another one of those teams that I look at Mississippi State and I don't see a ton of weaknesses. I don't know that there's anything in particular that just kind of, blows you away about them. Like I think they're solid in a lot of different areas, but again, I think there is something too. I don't think that they're really bad in any areas either. And I think that could be something here. And we talk about opportunity. Mississippi State's got Missouri, Ole Miss, and Georgia up next. I mean, they're a pretty good chance to be 4-0. And they come back home against Alabama. Like they could get off to a really good start here, and so I think this is a big opportunity for them and to use this coming off this first game for Mississippi State. I think they're the team now we certainly put all our attention on and say, there's a really good chance that they're one of those teams that are going to kind of creep up there. And like I said, I mean, they could get off to a 4-0, 4-1 type start, 5-0 maybe if all goes according to plan. I think they could crash the party here because I think they're really good. So
we haven't talked much about them, and I don't think we've talked at all about Shaquille Moore, who was maybe by the box score the best player on the floor last night. Iverson Molinar, I think, is squarely in the running for Player of the Year at this point. He was a guy I really liked a year ago. You couldn't really hand out a lot of accolades to that team because they didn't do much as a team, right? But his numbers were good. Tolo Smith has been a very solid, underrated big. He was good again last night. They've got Garrison Brooks from North Carolina, who's had a really nice season. We noted going into the year that if they got the Garrison Brooks from 2 years ago, that'd be a big get for them. DJ Jeffries, the Memphis transfer, Rocket Watts from Michigan State. I mean, Blake, these are a lot of guys that can really play at a pretty high level. And in a year where you're seeing COVID stuff, you're going to see injuries at some point. That looks to me like a team, they got answers across the board. They got a front court, they got a back court, and they got a lot of guys. And I think that does make a pretty good case that they could be more of a factor than maybe a lot of people were figuring.
I think it's easier to figure out what you're going to get from transfers. It's never a guarantee, but it's easier when they transfer from similar places or conferences. I think it's easier to get a grasp on what they're going to give you, and that's what you get. Like with these guys we talked about with Moore or Brooks or any of those guys like that. Jeffries, right? I mean that's Memphis is not the same, but it's Memphis, right? And you're still something like that. So I think there's something to it, and never know about the chemistry, but the chemistry's there with this group. And I don't know how much you read into, a 13-point win over an Arkansas team without JD Notae. I know that's what a lot of people will be talking about, but I still think that there's something to Mississippi State being pretty good. And I think if they can, back-to-back road games here, Missouri and Ole Miss, if they go out and take care of business in both of those games, they'll be the favorite. Then I think you really start to say, okay, like this team is not messing around. Like they're good enough to win these kind of games that they should win. And then I think you start to look at it and say, all right, well, Mississippi State's one we're going to have to throw into that mix too, in terms of some of the maybe among the best teams in the league. So
it was a little jarring to look at the net rankings this morning, and Arkansas sitting there at 90. Not a lot of great wins so far. Kansas State, Cincinnati are probably the Razorbacks' best two wins. Those are probably NIT teams right now. At what point do you get concerned if you're Arkansas, particularly if Notae doesn't come back soon? And I don't know what the timeline on his return is supposed to be. I don't think it's serious, but sometimes little nagging injuries turn into big nagging injuries. I'm not saying that's the case, but you're already in a little bit of a net hole there if you're Arkansas. Now your best player missed the game last night.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it, I think it's like if you look up and down their schedule, there's not a whole lot of opportunity until late January.
Yeah.
LSU on January 15th, that's really their only quality win opportunity as of right now, as it sits right now, which maybe A&M winds up getting there. I don't know, because they do have two games against A&M in that stretch. But LSU, that's about it up until that game they play West Virginia on January 29th. And then that's where all your opportunities are going to come after that, right? Like you've got an entire back half that's loaded with quality win opportunities. So, the thing is, and we always talk about this, you've got to avoid losing some of those games you shouldn't lose, because you don't have enough of a resume right now to support an NCAA tournament bid. So
Yeah.
I think that's where things get interesting for Arkansas, and how they proceed with that, I think, is going to be kind of fascinating. So
See, that's my concern for them. I guess you look at it, you say, well, you'd rather have, if you're going to have Notae miss some time, you'd rather it be now rather than later. But they just haven't bagged a lot of good wins. And, you throw in a loss to an Ole Miss or a South Carolina, or a couple of those, or God forbid, a Georgia. Then all of a sudden you've dug yourself a really big hole potentially by the time you can make it up. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how much ground you can make up from 90 in the net, but I was astonished to see that number. And like you said, they're going to just have to tread water for a while between now and then. I don't know how far they can move up in the net until they start playing those games.
they're not going to move up much. Again, unless Vanderbilt, A&M, those kind of teams really make some moves. That's about all you got. I mean, Mississippi State, like I said, maybe that loss ain't going to look as bad probably, but I think it's going to be interesting because you can't drop some of those games, especially knowing that, the chances of you winning a lot of those games, even on the back half, you're going to lose some of those games. So I think that's going to be interesting. So
Georgia got beat by Gardner-Webb last night.
yeah, let's just call it what it is. I mean, they're the worst team in the league. I mean, I don't know where they go from here.
By 17, Blake. By 17 points.
They're the
6
worst
and
team in
7
the league.
Gardner-Webb.
Again, they're not a very good team. How they beat Memphis, we'll all look back and wonder how that happened. But this is the program, and I just don't. You talk about losing games like this. Their SEC schedule, like they're going to be the underdog in every game they play the rest of the season, and so Georgia getting to double-digit wins this year is going to be highly unlikely, I think. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to find the optimism. It is a completely new team, but they're 13 games in the season at this point, and they're starting to lose these games against the games they should have won. And they're not very good, and I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like for them. Conference play, not exactly sure what the program's going to look like, a year from now. So,
are you shocked Missouri's not at least a little bit better? I mean, I know nobody had Missouri in the top 8 or 9, but they brought in a couple of player of the years from other mid-major leagues. They got Ronnie DeGray, I guess, from UMass, who was okay. A couple guys returning. Kobe Brown's had a nice year for them, for nothing. But, let's call it what it is. He's getting, I think, 20 and 12 per 70 possessions, something like that. You called it last night, and I hope somebody took you up on that. They went to Rupp, and it happened exactly like you said it would. They were down 17 at half, got beat 83-56, but they're not even competitive, and I thought they'd at least be competitive.
Here's the thing. We talk about the three-point percentage. No, sometimes that can be overplayed. But if you're going to be as bad as they are at shooting the three, you've got to be elite from 2, right? And you got to have elite players elsewhere that can just get you a 2-point basket anytime you need it. And they don't have enough of that. I'm looking at their 3 points here now, and you look at their percentages, they're still awful. But I mean, let's see. Only 3 games this season they've made more than, I think, 5 or 6 threes in a game. And it's just like when you don't have any sort of outside threat whatsoever.
Say that again?
I think there's only 3 games this season where they've had more than 5 or 6 threes in a game.
Wow.
So again, that's on average, you're around that 5 to 6 mark making threes. In this era, that's hard to win. Again, unless you're John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins and guys that are just scoring at will in the paint. Yeah, I just don't. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. And let's point it out, too. Like, this is not a Conzo Martin defensive team. His teams are usually pretty solid on the defensive front. But this team just isn't to the level of some of his other defensive teams. So when you can't score, you have basically you take one entire element of the game out on offense because you can't make threes and you don't really take care of the ball that well. And you're not a great defensive team. I mean, it's a recipe for a lot of losing, and unfortunately, that's where they're at this point. So am I surprised they're this bad? Yeah, I'd say a little bit, but I think if you go a little bit further into it, I think it was always going to be a rebuilding year for them. And when you compare the roster, I think to all these other rosters, maybe I shouldn't be that surprised. But that's another one where it's like, man, this is it's a rebuilding season, but it's one that could get pretty ugly just based on how they're playing right now. So
Other than that, Ms. Lincoln, how was the play?
right. Yeah, it's an interesting time in SEC basketball for some of these teams in particular that we talked
Well,
about.
you've got Georgia and Missouri are awful. Ole Miss is starting to make you wonder if they're awful. Vandy and A&M, I think, have been solid. I'm still not as sold on Vandy. The computers have got them higher than the eye test has gotten them, but they did just beat BYU, which was ranked a couple weeks ago. A&M's been solid. Again, I don't know that they played much of anybody. And then you got the 8 we've talked about all year, starting with Arkansas and Florida at the bottom of that list. But Kentucky, my goodness, how many 20 rebound games is Oscar Schwebe going to have? Like, if you just pulled his profile out, you'd say he's like 1960s big men, where they missed all those shots, and so everybody got a ton of rebounds. But he goes for 13 and 20 last night. He had, 28 boards his last time out? I mean, it's incredible what that kid is doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's you talk about game changers, like he's a game changer, and sometimes that's all you need. You just need one guy like that can do what he does, and it just completely changes all other elements of the game. And that's what we said. I mean, for a team like Missouri that struggles as much as they do offensively, like it was just, where do your opportunities come from, right? If what is it? I think I'm looking. Missouri did get 9 offensive rebounds, which maybe more than I thought they would have, but it's like you're limited when you got a guy like this on the boards, no matter who you are, whether you're Missouri, Auburn, Tennessee, whoever. It's just, yeah, I mean, he's swiping everything. So it's such a luxury to have, when you've got guys that, as we talked about, are still getting acclimated, figuring out, how their offense is going to flow with Wheeler and Grady and Washington and all those guys. So when you can have a guy like, Speedway, I mean, it just makes it so much easier. And I think that's kind of the big part of it is he makes things so much easier on the backcourt. And I think there's, that's very important, especially I think for the makeup of this particular team.
Are there as much you can take away from A&M beating a 2-10 Central Arkansas team by 26 points? That was the only other game last night, the only one we haven't talked about. But Andre Gordon's been a nice player for them, but Quentin Jackson's really stepped up. He's a guy that we're working on our Player of the Year list, our top 14. I don't think we had him on there, but you and I did talk about him. He goes for 31 last night on 18 shots, 7 boards, didn't do anything else. But that's an interesting team. They play a lot of guys, and again, Jackson's the guy that's sort of stepped up for them and become a bit of a star there, Blake.
Yeah, I remember, doing the A&M preview for Blue Ribbon and talking to one of the assistant coaches, and that's exactly what he said, was if they were going to be successful, it was Quentin Jackson was going to be the guy that kind of had to get him there, and he has. And, again, you look at their resume, nothing really is going to stand out to you and just overwhelming, just wow you. But I still think that I think they're like a slot behind Mississippi State, just based on watching them play. But, they could be sneaky too, to where, like you said, if you see a team like Arkansas that's maybe starts to spiral, or, Florida not as good as we thought they could be, that's where you have teams like Mississippi State and A&M that can sort of jump up in there and really surprise you and maybe knock a couple of those teams out of those spots. So I think it's early still to get a good read on A&M. Probably know a little bit more over the next couple of weeks. Georgia, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Missouri up next. So theoretically, they could start 3-1 in the SEC, maybe 4-0. Arkansas's, as we said, not playing well. That's games in College Station, so maybe you're looking up Mississippi State and A&M are among the undefeateds here in a couple of weeks. We'll see.
Yeah, the computers have got A&M, the major ones, right in that NIT range right now. We'll see. Again, they beat Notre Dame, nice win. That's something Kentucky could manage, but yeah, we'll wait and see. South Carolina got its game canceled last night. Ole Miss, Florida got canceled. I think that was a Florida problem, wasn't it, with COVID?
I'm
pretty sure.
At this point, I think it's like flip a coin because you don't. It's somebody. It's one of the. It's just like that's just kind of the nature of where things are at, and I guess it'll be interesting. At least, I guess with the way the schedule falls for the SEC, at least now you've kind of got that essentially almost a week break to where the next games aren't until Tuesday for most teams. I know Kentucky plays High Point on Friday, but your next conference games aren't until Tuesday, so maybe there's a chance if you have any issues now you kind of you get that sort of week break to maybe work through some of that. So
lie to me if you have to. Tell me we're not going to do this again with games getting canceled. And
I don't know. I don't. Again, I think I will give them credit. I think that there's at least a much better process of figuring out what you're going to do if that happens. And I think you're seeing conferences adjust. And to me, that's very important because otherwise, as we talked about before, Big East and all that, it's just you have to adjust. And I think that we're seeing that. The SEC was always – they've always been, I think, very good about that since this whole thing started. And no one's perfect. But I think that, adjusting, understanding that there are ways you can make up games if you need to make them up. And so if it happens, maybe it does. Obviously, none of us know how long in terms of that kind of thing. But I do think there's a much better process in place to be able to figuring out when you're going to play these games. And so maybe there's hopefully not a scenario where you're talking about uneven conference games and all that kind of stuff. So
any parting thoughts?
No, I think I said full slate gets started next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. That'll get started then. So should be fun.
Well, if anybody listened to you in the preview videos we made, that they could have made a buck or two. Tell folks about the partnership we've got with Action 24/7.
Yeah, Action 24/7. If you sign up, make your first deposit. I think they'll match it up to $800, I believe it is. And yeah, all you have to do is click on the little referral link we have in the description of this video and use the code SOUTH14, and they will give you just that. So yeah, nice little bonus there. If you went the Kentucky route, I think it was. I don't remember what the over-under was, but I think I took the under, and I said if 19 is that spread, then I would jump on that because it was going to be a struggle for Missouri, I thought. But, yeah, hopefully we'll give you some more winners here as we go along. So we'll see about that. But.
You were at least 2 for 3 yesterday. You called Auburn. You called that one, although I don't know what the line ended up being. We only had Ken Palm to go by at that point, and I don't remember. Alabama was, I think, a 2 or 4 point favorite, so that may have been a push. I don't know if that moved after the Tennessee news or not, but you at least got 2 out of 3, I know for sure.
Let me see if I can find one real quick for Tuesday, an early one.
Blake's picks.
See, we're gonna try to find one here. LSU hosts Kentucky. That's the big game on Tuesday. If you look at Ken Palm, it's got LSU as a 3-point favorite, I guess, winning this game by 3. That's an interesting one. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I was going to go with that one, but I'm more curious to see what that looks like. So, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, while we're doing that, let me look up a couple here because I'll tell you who I'm thinking about right now. Interests me is Arkansas because Arkansas was ranked this week. Again, we're not picking on Arkansas. There's been years we've loved them. We just don't like what we're seeing as much right now. If they don't have Notae, that makes a big difference. Okay, they got Vandy. That's at home. Yeah, I wouldn't.
Ken Palm, though. Ken Palm's got it 5. I think that's very fascinating.
Yeah? You think Vandy can stay within 5?
Depends on if Notae plays. I think that.
Yeah, if Notae plays, I'd be all over Arkansas there. But Vandy did sneak up on BYU. So
the other ones are Auburn at South Carolina and Georgia A&M, and I think both of those are tricky.
Okay.
I think Auburn at South Carolina is a little tricky because I don't think we know what we're getting from South Carolina yet. So I think Auburn's certainly the superior team, but playing in Columbia is never a fun task. So
No. But you know what is fun is doing these a couple times a week,
yeah,
and we'll
there
be
you go.
doing at least 2 previews, I think, and probably a couple wrap ups. And frankly, I think we'll just find an excuse to do these as much as we can because we both love it. And it was fun to sit in front of the TV last night, watching sometimes 2 games at once, and just seeing these teams play. I know we've just ever since the preseason we've said there's a lot of good teams. We don't really know how it's going to shake out. We were stumped as you guys were in a lot of cases, and to see us start to get answers. Although I hate that Tennessee had the injury situation, because I would have loved to have seen those 2 teams go at each other at full strength. But even with that, it was fun to watch SEC on SEC, and we've got another 2.5 months of that to come. So I can't wait.
Yeah, I think to me that's always important, and I mean anyone that's probably followed you or I over the years probably knows that. Is I don't just say stuff to say stuff just to have something to say, right? Like I will always be the person. I'm not going to tell you, well, this is 100% fact. Like I will always say, I'm not sure. Like, well, let me look at this first, right? It's like, let me see this team do something here or there, and then I'll give you a little bit more of where I'm at on them. But like, I think sometimes we do that. Like, it's like we have to say something, but I'm more of like, let's wait till the SEC play. Let's see what
I can vouch for this because how many times have I said, let's hop on and talk, and you're like, I just haven't seen enough yet to put myself out there. So you're not lying.
You don't have to have an opinion on every single thing.
Right.
There's my words of wisdom for the day. Like, I promise. Like, Twitter.
That's why Twitter exists.
Encourages that, but you don't have to have it on everything. And so that's why it has. I mean, again, it's different, but I do always like this non-conference, I think, is always very tricky to just go full on judgment on a team because I think there's so many different elements that coaches can work with in non-conference and try out rotations to get to this conference play. I think you always kind of wait a second just to see, but now I think you really start to get a better grasp on it. So
I can tell you are much more bolder in your takes now that you've seen them play a few times, which is great.
Yeah, a little bit better about where things are at with some of these teams. So
we're tapping back into passionate Blake.
Yep, that's it.
All right. We'll be back.
Congratulations, everyone.
That's right. Look what you've won. We'll be back with more of these next week. We'll preview some games. We'll wrap up some games that have been played as they happen next week. Anyway, I'm Chris Lee for Southeastern 14. He's Blake Lovell. Thanks for watching again. A lot more of this to come during basketball season.